So at 5:03, I will call the Wednesday, September 28th session of the City of St. John Council Finance Committee to order. First order of business is we have minutes from August 24th. I would ask for a motion for approval of the minutes. Councillor Hickey, Councillor Norton, thank you. All in favor signify. Contrary minded, carried. Item 3 is the approval of the agenda. We have 6 items on the agenda. I'll ask for a motion to approve the agenda. Councillor Hickey, Councillor Norton, all in favor, aye. Contrary minded, carried. I'll ask if there are any disclosures of conflict of interest on our agenda items today. Not seeing any, we'll move on. There's no items on the consent agenda, which takes us to item 6, the business matters. Item 6.1 is the 2022 bilateral program projects. And we'll start with soon to be former Commissioner McGovern.
Thank you, Chairman Sullivan and members of Finance Committee.
Not that soon there, Chairman Sullivan.
As committee is aware, like a lot of sectors, the cost of construction has increased significantly. Given we had applied for and received funding some time ago to complete projects over a multi-year horizon as part of our bilateral funding program, project costs had been estimated to escalate in accordance with historic inflationary trends. They did not reflect the double-digit increases that we have begun to see. So with that in mind, the team went back and looked at our projects that we have funding approved for and for projects that will be constructed next year to ensure that we have the funding in place to complete the projects. The recommendations before you that Mr. Mike Baker, our Director of Engineering and Chief City Engineer, will take you through are to identify how we allocate the funding to complete the projects based upon the revised engineering estimates. We may not spend all of the money, or we could possibly need more, but this recommendation is important to know that we have capacity to spend what we realistically think the projects will come in at. Lastly, we're before you now, as it is our interest to get best pricing on the tenders and get them out very early. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Baker to walk us through some of the details. Thanks.
Good afternoon. As indicated by Commissioner McGovern, in order to start tendering multiple projects in early October, supplemental funding is required for 7 2022 bilateral funded projects. The supplemental funding is being requested based on the higher than expected tenders the city received in 2022. Revised estimates were completed based on the new market conditions that reflect higher than historic estimated values. Given this, additional funding will be required to complete the 7 projects. It is estimated that an additional $655,000 of city share general fund funding is required to fund the 7 projects noted in this report. In May 2022, the 2022 general fund capital budget was updated. Within the updated 2022 general fund capital budget, the city share funding of $170,000 was left unallocated, as the plan was to utilize it to cover future 2022 shortfalls within tendered projects that have a general fund share. It is now being requested that the unallocated funding within the 2022 general fund capital program be allocated to the 7 projects noted in the report. The remainder of the required $655,000 is $485,000, and it is recommended to come from the city's general fund capital reserve, as the significant year-over-year increase on projects were not something that could be foreseen. It is estimated that an additional $419,500 of utilities share funding is required to fund the 7 bilateral projects. The utility share funding is supplemental funding for the utility components within the 7 bilateral project funded 2022 capital projects. The required supplemental funding was included within utilities proposed 2023 utility capital program. Therefore, staff are recommending the pre-approval of the supplemental funding for the 7 projects noted in the report. It should be noted that for both the general fund and utility fund, the funding requested is city share funding only, which is 26.67%. And it is expected that the other share funding, which is 73.33%, would come out of the overall bilateral program, which is a multi-year program. I'm extending until 2026. I recommend that the Finance Committee endorse the three recommendations noted in the Finance Committee report before you. With that, I will pass it back to Chairman Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Any questions on the bilateral program adjustments from committee? Councillor Hickey, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. Just quickly through you to Mr. Baker. Understanding that the opportunities were given with these street reconstructions, in particular looking at St. James Street, Pitt Street, a couple Britain Lower South End ones, not necessarily curb sidewalks, not necessarily grass medians in them. Any of those opportunities taken here to adjust that and rectify that. I understand these ones don't necessarily fit into our active transportation planning in terms of bike lanes, but more so just creating better, more user-friendly streets for a neighborhood that doesn't necessarily always travel by car.
Yeah, exactly what we're trying to do. Most of those streets have asphalt curbs, asphalt sidewalks, and what we're going to be putting in there is concrete curbs, concrete sidewalks. And we have worked with Public Works and Transportation to narrow the road where we could in order to create more space and have larger grassed medians for most of those. But all the streets noted aren't really, except for Charlotte Street, which Charlotte Street is one of the main corridors that we will have going from Union down to Lower Cove Loop. So that one is separate from Pitt and Britain and St. James.
But you do think on St. James Street's a huge street. It's one that would be identified to see some changes gone to it.
I don't know specifically St. James, but I do know that we do look and we work with the traffic engineer to determine what level of lanes we do need in order to have parking on the streets, adhere to the actual requirements of switching over at night, and still be able to have appropriate sized lanes in order for them to be able to do maintenance and snow clearing.
So is this the final approval for those?
So these were.
Does it come back to council afterwards?
These were actually approved in 2022.
Okay.
Projects.
I think I asked the same question then.
Yeah. So they were approved in 2022. So the designs on several of these projects are very close to complete, and we have worked with the Central Peninsula Plan, worked with Public Works. To try and come up with the best cross section for each street.
I see the city manager's hand up too, Chair.
Yeah. Mr. City Manager, go ahead.
Yeah, if I could. And Councillor Hickey, you're right. You did ask the same questions the last time around on these projects, and it's a perfectly legitimate question to ask. I would just like to remind Finance Committee that Move SJ has laid out in quite a bit of detail which roads should serve what purposes. Some have a requirement to be arterial roads, and at the other end of the spectrum, some have been identified as major efforts to go on a road diet, be more pedestrianized, etc. And there's some in the middle as well. So when we look at all of these projects and seek approval of them, and these ones have already been approved, we do base it on what is identified within Move SJ. that is our guiding document. We cannot pedestrianize every street, as we know. We can't turn it, and we don't want to turn every street into an arterial, as we know. So it is that balancing act of all the various parts of it, and that's what Move SJ lays out for us. Thank you.
Okay, I would just say specific to Move SJ for St. James Street, St. James Street is listed in there as creating a more enhanced road to better fit the realities of the neighborhood. So I do hope to see changes at that. I only ask because, you know, I walk down Waterloo Street every day and look at the opportunity that I think we should have taken with in terms of, you know, reimagining a bit of that street a bit more, just because it's so big. We have such an opportunity to create better, more user-friendly spaces with them.
Thanks, Councillor.
Thanks, City Manager, and thanks to Mr. Baker too for the report.
So back to the finance side of this, which is what we have in front of us. But good questions, Councillor. Are there any other questions about the financing of these projects? Okay, I'll take a motion on the recommendation. Councillor Norton, Councillor Radwin, and I'll just add my 2 cents. Again, you know, the times we're in right now with inflation and supply chain issues, very prudent to come back to us. Some choices need to be made, but because of some previous choices and actually having a capital reserve, we are able to manage this in a responsible way. So thanks to staff for doing all of that on our behalf. So with that, I'll take the vote on the motion. All in favor, aye. Contrary minded. And sorry, Councillor Norton, was that a contrary or a late pro? Thank you. We should do thumbs up and thumbs down. Thanks. All right, so that's carried. Item 6.2, the City of St. John Natural Infrastructure Fund. Commissioner McGovern.
Thank you once again. The team is always, Chairman Sullivan and Finance Committee members, team's always looking to align council priorities and our infrastructure needs with funding opportunities. And it's really to bring our intentions into action. So I would like to flag that for this funding opportunity, if we're successful, the project needs to be completed by December 31st, 2024. We did note in the report December 31st, 2025, but it is the December 31st, 2024. So I just wanted to flag that. So this evening we are before you to provide you with an update on the opportunity. Mr. Samir Yamin, our Manager of Asset and Energy Management, will provide a brief overview of this funding submission. Mr. Yamin.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McGovern. I'll try to be optimistic for 2025, but didn't work for me. So I would just want to give you a quick update overview of the funding agreement we have in front of us, which is the Natural Infrastructure Fund, and how this and what project did we decide when we consulted to apply for this funding. As you know, in 2021, the federal government has launched a new program called the Natural Infrastructure Fund, which is around $200 million. And the main objective of this, which I can agree on that myself, is for municipality as well, for community to try to enhance the use of their natural asset in order to ensure their community as well as their infrastructure are resilient to climate event, as well also to protect their natural environment, whether it is wetland or forest or park and so on, and also to contribute to the economy's growth and job on this year. From the $200 million, there was $120 million was allocated last year, and it was closed last year toward the large major cities under the large progress. As you know, this stream is already being closed for the application. 20 million of this project is allocated for indigenous recipient, and the remaining, which we call it the small project stream, $63.8 million remaining on this project, which the city is applying for this project under. As indicated, this project is eligible for both the natural infrastructure as well as a hybrid infrastructure. When we talk about natural infrastructure, we're talking about enhancing, restoring, preserving, whether it is wetland, whether it's a forest, whether it's a forest, waterway, and so on here. So this is one of the project, one of this natural asset. And the other one is, we call it the hybrid natural asset or hybrid infrastructure, which I call it myself is engineering asset, which includes such as rainwater harvesting, green roofing, green wall, and biocell, biodetention here. So the project is divided into, the funding is divided into two mechanisms. One, the first mechanism is grant funding, which is up to $250,000, and the government will provide 80% of the total eligible cost. The second one is called the contribution, which the city is applying for here, which is project has to be up to $3 million. The government will provide 80% of the total cost up to a maximum only of $1 million. As Mr. McGovern indicated, this project is aligned very well with our asset management program, as well with our proposed 10 years strategic plan, our climate change adaptation plan, as well as with the council priority. The deadline is September 27, 2022, which is yesterday. We successfully, after many trials, we were able to submit the application. So the city step prior to this, we have various discussion with consultation with various departments to identify what project is liable or project eligible for this type of application, by taking into consideration where we are with our project, the timeline to meet the project, which is 2024, December 2024. So in the end, the staff recommendation was to apply for under this funding for the urban planting trees. So the cost of this project funding is around $1.1 million, and type of funding mechanism under the small project stream. And we are requesting around $880,000 from the federal government under this project. The remaining fund will be coming, is around $220,000, will be coming from the operation budget 2023 and 2024. The urban tree planting, we're looking at planting over 1,150 trees across the city of Saint John on street. Yet we have not identified the area where we're going to plant this tree here. This will be a discussion with Park and Recreation staff, with the community, to identify the area where we're going to planting this tree. And this is, if successful, we are hoping to get this project completed between 2023 and 2024. We really understand, and we understand this project will be beneficial to our community, and also will be help us also to mitigate some of the climate change events, such could be heat island effect, as well as flooding and so on this project here. So the application already been submitted here, and if anybody have any question, I will gonna hand it over to Chairman here for anybody if have any question on this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yumin. Councillor Radwin with a question.
Thank you, Chair. I was really excited to see this one in the finance packet. So I wanted to mention that I'm glad to hear that we're doing this. Glad to hear that you're considering some areas in the city where there's flooding. Of course, in my ward, I end up thinking about Glen Falls, McAllister Drive, Bayside Drive, Rossay Avenue, those sort of areas. I mean, obviously, it's not going to fix any problem, but it does create beautification while helping mitigate the problem, right? One thing I feel badly, I feel like I almost need to apologize. I meant to get this information off to you before. I know when I was at the FCM conference, I found out that CN Rail actually gives some funding for tree planting. I'm not sure how much would be available to the municipality, but CN Rail is doing that. So just food for thought is one of those things that kind of got put into my lap while I was there. So that was just a nice little, it was nice to hear they've got, I think, project funding for a few different things, but one of them is tree planting.
Thank you, Councillor Radwin. I know our staff, if you mentioned it, if they've got money, our staff will find it. Thank you. Councillor Norton?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if Mr. Hugenholtz is with us or not, or actually it'd probably be more so it would be Mr. Dion. I'm unfamiliar with the what we already do as it relates to tree planting, but I see in front of me substantial completion December 2025. So would we be able to offset any I guess any future expenses as it relates to tree planting because of being a recipient of this type of funding? So I'm not sure what we do on an annual basis, but I guess what I'm looking to do is save on what we may already do because of this windfall, and apply those monies towards other aspects of our suite of recreation opportunities within the city, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I cannot be able to answer it. It is my understanding, I could be wrong here. It is our understanding, if we get this funding here, we're planning to complete this project by December 2024. Our goal, it is my understanding that our goal as part of the 10 years strategic plan, which not yet, is to have this project completed within 5 years, to have 1,000 planting tree. So this project will help us to
for operations and apply those monies that we would spend regularly on trees or replanting trees or damaged trees, and say, look, that's one less expense we have because we're going to take an opportunity of this and apply those monies in other areas of our public spaces or recreation operations.
Yeah,
Thanks. I see the city manager's hand up. Mr. Hugenholtz had his hand up, and Commissioner McGovern showed up on the screen. So I'll start with city manager, and we'll go from there.
okay. I'll have Mike explain what we do now, but the strategic plan requirement is new trees. So replacement of a tree that is damaged or has fallen would not fall into this category, right? It's supposed to be new and improved space. That said, the other aspect I want to mention is that the strategic plan, the 10-year strategic plan, will be revisited at least on a biannual basis, if not every year. And once we accomplish this goal, that won't be it for the 10 years, I'm sure. I'm sure there will be a desire for a follow-on objective, but that's to be discussed at a later date. And I'll hand over to Commissioner Hugenholtz.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm going to explain very briefly, I guess, the extent of our tree planting now. It is scaled back considerably from perhaps where we were 5 years ago or so. We do have a modest program right now to replace damaged trees. Beyond that, where we see a lot of gains is through our capital projects, where we undertake street reconstruction, usually expansion of the median where feasible, and planting trees would be a part of that work as well. So that's the extent of what we're talking about as far as our current efforts.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I guess that's what I'm trying to remove any redundancy where we would have already been where we already would have been buying trees. I no longer want to. You see what I'm trying to say here. So if there's savings to be had in our operations, anything that we can find in our parks and public spaces and recreation, like, it's not, I know I'm probably, I keep on honking on the same horn. We investing in our recreation assets, if we can even save on the price of one tree. It's a dollar saved is a dollar earned, and maybe a dollar spent someplace else. So thank you for your indulgence. Thanks, I guess, Mr. Chairman. I was a little long-winded and probably wasn't very careful in how I crafted the question.
No, I think we got it, and I think for those who may be on the call from outside our team, this is something we see often where our staff. I always say our staff, if there's a dollar to be found, they find it. And often it will be on projects, and we'll see those other share from city share change in columns in our budgets as we move and they find money. And any opportunity we have, I think the question is an important one. If we manage to get this grant, does that give us an opportunity to do more in recreation? And I think it's an important point. Are there any other questions with regards to this item? Okay, seeing none, this recommendation is a receive and file. I'll take that motion. Councillor Norton, Councillor Radlin, all in favor? Signify with an aye or a wave. Contrary minded? Carried. Thanks very much. Moving on, item 6.3, our recommended 2023-2024 general fund and utility fund capital budgets. CFO Fudge to start.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chairman Sullivan, members of the Finance Committee. I apologize if you hear any banging and crashing behind me as I'm presenting here. We have some construction in the building going on. We presented a 2-year draft capital budget for both the general fund and the utility fund to the Finance Committee at its meeting of August 24th, 2022, with the recommendation at that meeting to receive and file. The budget was put forward under the themes of grow, move, belong, green, and perform, which are council's priorities. This afternoon, we are now seeking your endorsement to bring forth as a receive and file for Common Council this Monday, October 3rd, the 2-year general fund and utility fund capital programs, which are a combined value of approximately $90 million, with less than $18 million funded through raising of new debt. The Finance Chair has also circulated the first draft to Council via email to give them a preliminary opportunity to offer feedback. To this date, we have not received any information to suggest we should make any changes prior to going to Council based on that feedback. This afternoon, our Controller, Mr. Craig Levine, will present a final draft budget to the Finance Committee, as well as provide the committee explanation for some minor changes made from the first draft you would have seen back in August. It's mostly associated with having greater certainty on funding from other levels of government. So with that, over to Mr. Levine. Thank you.
Thank you, CFO Fudge. To members of the Finance Committee, the purpose of this presentation is to provide the Finance Committee with an update on the changes made to the 2023 and 2024 capital budget since our previous meeting. The changes that occurred were based on updated information on various funding opportunities that were included in the last version, particularly the bilateral 2.0 and DTI funding. We also incorporated any various feedback from stakeholders, as well as incorporated more certainty around some of our projects, along with the timing of these projects. This slide shows the change from the current version to, from the previous version to the current. Other share was reduced by a little over $3.6 million, and the city's share increased by $378,000. Here are some highlights of the summary of the changes. The first 3 projects listed all relate to funding from DTI. These projects were removed as staff felt there would be little or no success in obtaining funding in 2023 or 2024. However, we will continue to pursue funding for these projects. Several projects, as we spoke about earlier, were removed or pushed out because of the bilateral 2.0. Next, based on Regional Service Commission, it is anticipated that the city will now see cost sharing for capital as it relates to our regional facilities. The city share removed from the bilateral funding projects and the regional facilities was reallocated to several projects, which included the Reversing Falls rock face maintenance, which will now not have to come out of our reserves, along with area improvements in that site, as well as storm sewer and street reconstruction for Bonner Place, as well as additional funds for parks and district energy. And this is just a recap on the other share reductions we just spoke about. The increase in the city share from the previous version will come out of additional capital from operating in 2023. In conclusion, the minor changes in this budget is still in line with all of our financial policies. Debt financing remains just below $18 million, which is part of our long-term financial plan. And the new versus renewal is still same at 80-20. For St. John Water, the majority of the changes, again, was a result of the bilateral funding 2.0 being pushed out and ensuring that these projects being delayed align with the changes that were made in the general fund. Utility share, which is funded from pay-as-you-go, will remain the same at just over $9.9 million. And the reduction in other shares is a result of the bilateral 2.0. But however, good news is there is expected new funding of just over $800,000 for the Lancaster Lagoon project. And with that, the recommendation to the Finance Committee is to approve the 2023 and 2024 general fund and utility fund capital budgets, and forward a copy of these budgets to the next meeting with Common Council for receipt and file. And with that, we'll take any questions the committee might have.
Thank you, Mr. Levine. Questions from committee? Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question about the District Energy Fund. So, I mean, I know that it's not it's not on our priority list as our 8 priorities. So I'm just wondering it's $1 million. So I'm just wondering, do we have any idea how much money would end up having to go into something like that long term? What sort of cost saving benefits that it would have? I mean, I know a lot of the time that's why you do a feasibility study, but it's just a lot of money that seems to be invested in this feasibility study and plan. So just wondering if staff have any indication on that. And then I have another little comment after.
Sure. Commissioner McGovern, are you looking to handle that one? Go right ahead.
Certainly, thank you. Yeah, with respect to the District Energy project, there's a number of components to it. So it is listed in the draft strategic plan. It's also one of the green priorities, and something that we look at for carbon neutral. So if we're going to become carbon neutral at some point, the importance of having the ability to have non-carbon emitting sources like Birch Hill, and possibly the district energy system is another opportunity. So it is a comprehensive study to really look at, is there a true opportunity here or not? It's something that's been discussed at length for a number of years now. And in terms of the overall cost, we are expecting it would be in the tens of millions of dollars, but would not, proceed unless there was a beneficial return on investment and some sort of cost benefit analysis that was done. And then also I would just note, in terms of the analysis, we are seeking funding from others on it. So I believe the way it's positioned in the report right now is 50% funded by others and 50% from the city.
Yeah, it is an even split. No, that's for sure. No, thank you. That's great. That gives me some insight. And I think there's probably a lot of money to be saved because it is a green energy project, I would assume. Do you have any indication on how much money we could save overall later, or is this something that'll probably come out of this?
Yeah, it would be speculative at this point in time. It is a green energy source, but we do expect, as the price of carbon continues to rise and the intentions behind the federal government to continue to increase the price of tax on carbon, that as time goes on, an energy source like this could become more of interest and more feasible.
Mr. City Manager, did you want to weigh in on this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to add that I don't believe we'll end up going alone on this at all. I believe there will be significant federal and provincial funding that will be tied to this project, both in the feasibility stage, but also in the implementation stage. The reality is district energy systems in Canada are rare, whereas in Europe, they're plentiful and are proving their worth. That would be the first point. But the second point is the city of St. John in particular is ideally suited to perhaps be leading edge in Canada on district energy because of, first of all, our terrain and the river system, but also because of the amount of heavy industry we have and the surplus heat that we are just basically venting into the atmosphere. So the potential is huge, and therefore the federal and provincial governments are extremely excited. And I believe that moving forward, the feasibility study will inform us, but when it comes time to actually seeking the funding for this, we're going to have some very receptive partners. Thank you.
That's great.
Thanks, Mr. City Manager. Councillor Redwin, you said you had another question?
Oh, I just have a little bit of a comment. So, I mean, I think there's also an argument for the district energy system to, you know, in creating sustainability, right? So that can't go remiss, but a lot of people are not that familiar with it. But I wanted to mention, when I was looking at these capital funds, these capital budgets, I couldn't help it. I felt a little bit of sadness. I think staff have done a great job, but I kept seeing all of this money that we're investing in the aquatic center and TD station, and I just can't help it. I keep feeling like there's such a huge opportunity missed. So when I, you know, think about going back to my business classes, what's your opportunity cost? And I think there's a huge opportunity cost there where we're not getting all of this support as a region. We could be doing an incredible amount of work if our region were to get on board with the cost sharing for some of these resources. And I really, really, really strongly believe that it would just uplift the entire region for us to become very good regional partners. So I just wanted to say that, Chair.
No, I think that is very fair comment, and I certainly share your sentiment. Councillor Norton, questions to you.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to know, is there any insight as it relates to helping support Play SJ, and obviously it's a big piece of our recreation master plan, but the extra boost that gets and where we see just at a high level going. I'm happy to see the approved funding. I probably wouldn't have brought it up if it wasn't for my comments on the other previous item, but now that it's there, it's good. For me, it's a good news story, just where we see what we see in terms of helping support that plan and what areas, or maybe staff doesn't quite know yet. It's getting down to the weeds.
Anyone from staff want to hit a few highlights on what's in the capital budget as it relates to Play SJ? I see Mr. Hugenholtz waving.
I've never asked questions before where I get three Top Guns wanting to pipe in on that as well.
Well, Mr. Chair, perhaps I could take a quick stab at it, and if Commissioner McGovern or anybody else wants to chip in as well. I would say, you know, we are starting to see more investment into recreational assets in this budget, as we have in last year's budget as well, and we hope to continue those trends. Certainly any projects that we're putting forward in terms of funding have been identified as priority in our Play SJ document. So the focus is still very much on those regional and district assets. You'll see an investment in there in Marketplace West, for example, Harbor Passage extension, and a number of other investments. But it is always through the lens of Play SJ, and certainly in the preparation of this document, you know, we would have consulted with all our strategic guiding documents, strategic plans. We would have spoken to Growth and Community Services, who also have a role to play in Play SJ in coming up with the list that you see before you.
Mike, do we ever, like, as part of that investment, do we ever use part of that investment to divest ourselves of obligations so that we're able to spend our monies more wisely on some of those regional and district hubs that you just referenced?
Yeah, through Mr. Chair to the councillor, I guess I would say that yes, it is somewhat of a slow process to continue to rationalize our assets. And, you know, an area in particular that I think about is neighborhood level playgrounds.
Sure.
There we have certainly identified, you know, the need to continue to reduce and to focus more on those regional and district assets. I would say that that is continuing, but in part, at least, that is driven by the state of the infrastructure. You know, we're certainly not interested in going into a neighborhood where the equipment is in good condition and we're seeing use of those assets. They're still appropriate for the neighborhood. We certainly don't want to rush in there and tear that all down. Really what we're seeing is as those assets, more local assets, approach end of life, and there is the need, you know, again, to invest or divest. Our strategic documents will tell us to divest. We certainly do engage with neighborhood groups at that time to see if there's an interest in some kind of a, you know, repurposing of that space or other neighborhood support of that space. But a lot of times there is not that there. So if those assets are fully depreciated, we do look at that time to decommission it as a playground and either look to divest of the space or repurpose it as something else through a community partnership typically.
Thanks so much, Mike.
Commissioner McGovern?
Yeah, it's just building on what Commissioner Hugenholtz has said. I just flag that there is a separate amount of money identified in 2023. We have allocated $900,000 for parks asset renewal. And there is a requirement to come back to Finance Committee with a plan for that. So that's captured on under the belong section. And it's about 3/4 of the way down. So there is a $900,000 line item in there. And we'll be back, we'll be back at some point with a plan to recommend to Finance Committee.
All right. Thank you, commissioners. Are there any other questions from committee? I guess the piece I think I would point out, it wasn't in the report because the report was pretty much changes really from our last Finance Committee meeting. But when you dig into the general fund budget for next year, even though there were changes, it's still showing that our plan for next year on the general funds side is to invest $32.5 million in capital, and $15.7 million is from the city. So over 50% of our planned expenditure on capital next year is still from external partners. So thank you to our external partners, and thank you to staff for continuing to look for that other share to get better than 50 cent dollars.
Mr. Chairman, I'd also say it's interesting when we're looking at this the draft capital I guess the draft general fund capital budget. I remember maybe a decade ago when I first received these, and I just want to thank the team, the readability and the user friendliness of how the information is now presented. Anyways, it's come light years, and I think it's much less difficult to be critical about the transparency and where things are going within our pie chart, if you will, whether it's 80% renewal or 20% new, things like that. Those types of graphic organizers from a public perception and even from a critical lens piece, whether it's news or whether it's folks that are just looking to take a deeper dive, how it's presented is just really good. You've done a really good job with it. And if folks lined it up in comparison to how it was presented years ago to where it is now, even how it's the project, the location, the description, other city share, like all of that information, it goes a long ways. And so at the same time, it limits conversation because everything is there. You can't say you're hiding anything because it's really an open book. So thank you.
That's why finance team is so cool. Recommendation we have in our kit. This is not just a receive and file. This is the recommendation. Actually, before we get to the recommendation, did we want to do the utility share, Commissioner Fudge?
Yes, we should present the the utility as well at the same time. I'll turn back over to Craig.
There was a slide. It was very limited because our poor little friends at the utility don't get a lot of excitement on there. But we did touch base on the minor changes, and I spoke about the exciting new funding we're getting for the Lancaster Lagoon, which I'm sure Commissioner McGovern's very, very excited about. So the recommendations are there for both the general fund and the utility fund.
Thank you. I didn't want to leave out the poor utility. So did we have any questions on the utility budget committee? No, everybody seems to be good. All right, so the two recommendations we do have recommended that the Finance Committee approve the 2023-2024 draft general fund budget in the amount of $62,570,055 with city share approximately 29.9 million, other share 32.6 million, and forward it to the next meeting of Common Council for receive and file. And recommend that the Finance Committee, the 2023-2024 draft utility fund budget in the amount of approximately $27.2 million, with the utility share being 9.9 million, other share being 17.3 million, and forward that to the next meeting of Common Council for receive and file. Could somebody put forward that motion, please?
So moved.
Councillor Norton, Councillor Hickey, question? All in favor, aye. Contrary minded? Carried. So we'll talk about that next Monday at council. Our next item is council professional development policy. And I would like to thank staff just before I hand this off to CFO Fudge. I tried to take a page out of staff's book and listen very closely to the conversation we had a couple of council meetings ago, and asked Mr. Levine and Mr. Fudge if they could have a look at this. Wasn't officially referred to us, but I picked it up from council, and I thank them for having returned it so quickly. So with that, I'll turn it over to CFO Fudge.
Thank you very much. Common Council has expressed an interest in adding some structure in which way professional development opportunities are not only budgeted, but are also allocated to elected officials. The city is committed to encouraging professional development for the mayor and Common Council, recognizing the investment is linked to the achievement of the city's missions, strategic direction, and governance of the organization. The policy before you this afternoon for recommendation to Common Council sets criteria to ensure fairness and equity in the allocation of budget amongst Common Council, Mayor and Common Council, sets for criteria for the use of the funds, and includes reporting requirements for transparency to the public. Policy also does not require council approval for professional development opportunities in the future, unless it is expressly stated in this policy as needing council approval. Such is the case for requests that if there's an amount that exceeds budget, it would have to go back to council. But if it's within the policy that's before you this evening, there would be no need to bring these opportunities to council any further. So we also took a look at other policies in other jurisdictions, municipalities, and we used those policies as a model to create this policy for the city of St. John. So with that, I hope it satisfies the need of the Finance Committee and Common Council, and I'd be happy to take some questions. Thank you.
Thanks, CFO Fudge. Any questions from committee? That tells me you did a good job, team. So I'll take a motion recommended that the Finance Committee endorse the policy as presented, and that we take a recommendation to Common Council for approval. Councillor Radwin, Councillor Hickey, all in favor, signify with aye. Contrary minded, carried. Good job, team. Thank you very much. Moving on, 6.5, grant policy update, and back to CFO Fudge.
Thank you very much. Another policy. Finance Committee approved a grant policy in March, subject to Growth and Community Services carrying out some engagement with the community groups who typically apply for community grants. Policies before you again tonight with the request to proceed to council with recommendation for approval. Just a little bit on the engagement, the public engagement that was conducted by Growth and Community Services First, a memo was sent to all previous recipients of the grant with notification of the policy, and in the memo it included the proposed key terms and I guess the new items of the policy. In the memo, they also identified a small group that would likely be more impacted based on the fact that the policy has a 30% limit for operational funding. Those organizations our growth team met individually with, providing the opportunity to discuss in more detail, ask questions, express any concerns. Based on the engagement that was conducted, only one community group expressed some concerns based on the fact that they are currently dependent on city grants to operate. But other than that, no significant concerns were expressed. The other reason this policy is before you this afternoon is there have been some amendments from the previous version that you had approved to address requests for major grants or grants that are over $25,000. Policy was amended to ensure all grants, no matter the size, follow best practices, are properly budgeted in advance. We also add further definition to in-kind grants in the policy. And we also add new restrictions for the use of city reserve funds to fund grants to third parties. Most notably, the policy calls for reserve funds are not an appropriate source of funding for grants unless it is planned for and is part of the annual operating budget. There's also provision in the policy that indicates, and it's very consistent with a resolution of council recently, that reserve funds would not be appropriate for use if the reserve fund is below 75% fully funded. So with that, those are the primary changes to the policy, and we're looking for a recommendation to move forward to Common Council for approval. Thank you.
Thanks, CFO Fudge. Questions or comments from committee? Seeing none, I will take a motion that we, Finance Committee, endorse the grant policy and we take it forward to Common Council for approval. Councillor Hickey, Councillor Radwin, all in favor, signify with aye. Contrary minded, and carried. That takes us to 6.6, which is the proposed funding plan for the new recreation facility catalytic project. CFO Fudge.
Thank you very much. Common Council named 4 infrastructure projects and 4 advocacy projects as being catalytic during your term. Of the 4 infrastructure projects, 1 is the responsibility of the province, which is a school. 1 is already being funded as part of a major project for the city, which is Fundy Key. Another one is industrial parks, which is currently undergoing a market assessment and a business case to determine what investment is needed and what's right for the city of St. John. And we'll return with a separate funding strategy when we have the results of that review, that business case. The last infrastructure project is the comprehensive recreation facility. So a new recreation facility is a significant capital investment for the city, not currently funded in any of the city's long-term financial plans. The facility is meant to modernize and replace the city's aging arenas that are, I think, vintage 1960s, and add a new value proposition to the city of St. John that is already offered in other large urban areas across Canada and in New Brunswick. This investment could be anywhere in the magnitude of $50 to $60 million. And to ensure the city remains on track with the debt management plan, it calls for the need to plan in advance and have prepared funding plan. As a benchmark for our estimate, the city of Dieppe in 2020 built the Uniplex, which consists of only 2 sheets of ice, and that project cost approximately $31 million. So we are recommending a few strategies and a policy in regards to planning for this project. First, this project is not fiscally feasible without the provincial and federal government support. So the plan would include assuming a third funding from the province of New Brunswick and a third funding from the federal government, leaving the municipal portion at approximately $20 million. We would then recommend restricting new debt for this project to $5 million in order to stay on track with our debt management plan. We would also recommend that over the next 5 years, the city begins to save money and save up to $3 million per year and put that into a capital reserve to fund the other $15 million, which would include basically 2 strategies. First, subject to our budget capacity, And when I say budget capacity, I'm talking about our service level requirements, being able to achieve the objectives and strategic plan, the revenue that we are able to generate with tax-based growth, unconditional grants, so on and so forth, that subject to all those conditions, that we strive to include $3 million annually in the operating budget into a capital reserve for the recreational facility, to be specific, recreation facility capital reserve. We also suggest that we augment that funding, as there may be years where we simply cannot afford to put $3 million per year into the capital reserve based on our needs, that we augment that funding with a policy from council over its term over the next 5 years, that any annual operating surpluses we're able to achieve be allocated to the capital reserves for purposes of funding a future new comprehensive recreation facility. So if supported by the Finance Committee, we would recommend the following motion to council at a future council meeting. First and foremost, the Finance Committee endorse the following recommendations: direct staff to consider including in the draft 2023 general operating budget, conditional upon tax-based growth and service level requirements, up to $3 million into a recreation facility capital reserve. Second, recommend that Common Council resolve to allocate any operating surpluses over the council term to a recreation facility capital reserve to support construction of a new comprehensive recreational facility. Third, recommend that Common Council direct staff to prioritize the pursuit of federal and provincial funding to support the comprehensive recreational facility. And fourth, direct the city manager to discuss the project with the Regional Service Commission to determine if there's any regional interest in this project. And with that, be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Questions or comments from committee? Councillor Radman, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm having a little bit of challenge with this one. I sent an email off to CFO Fudge, so he kind of knows. First of all, Kevin, I'm just kind of wondering, I think, where do you think that the $3 million would be in the budget to allocate to reserves? And I'm totally a believer in saving money for investments, but.
Sure. So first and foremost, I'm being informed by the fact that council has named this project as a catalytic project. And I think it's quoting the city manager, and I'm not sure what the exact terms are, but if you don't have a funding strategy, then it's just a hallucination. It's not a real strategy. So really, we're being informed that this is a priority council. This is a infrastructure project that council wants to see move forward. So if that's the case, we need a strategy to fund it. It would really be based on our tax-based growth, the ability to, keep our operating expenses in line with inflation, the ability to, generate additional revenue through other sources through user fees. So it'd be holistically based on the overall budget. What the recommendation is not to direct us to specifically put $3 million in no matter what. It is a goal to put $3 million per year in, and it will be based on all those considerations, and those considerations will be very transparent through the operating budget process for council to understand. If we have the capacity, what we're suggesting is that we would do that. We would put $3 million per year in because it is a priority council. If we don't have room for $3 million, that's why the secondary strategy of perhaps we could augment the strategy with annual surpluses if we're able to achieve it, and placing that into a capital reserve to fund this project. But it's not a deliberate, immediate, and direct $3 million adjustment you're going to see in every budget. It will be based on our capacity.
The other part of this that I've been struggling with is that it's just limited to this project and not including industrial parks. So I couldn't help it. I started thinking about the time when my husband was looking, and myself, we were looking at buying a house and also opening a business. And I remember him saying to me, the business will pay for the house, but the house won't pay for the business. And so that sort of strategy came to my mind as well. If you had tax-based growth in the industrial parks, then it could help augment the fees for the recreation facility. So I would love to see it more branched out to go into either pocket, and we don't know what that investment needs to be for the industrial parks, but I totally commend you because we certainly need to be planning our finances.
Yeah, and I think with the industrial parks, once we have that business case flushed out, We will have a separate, very specific, deliberate funding strategy as well, much like the district energy discussion. That will be business case oriented. It'll be based on return on investment. That project should pay for itself if we have a solid business case. So we would be coming forward with a completely separate strategy. Some part of that strategy may be a deliberate industrial park capital reserve as well, but we're just reserving our judgment on that until we see the feasibility and the business case study done, and we'll come back to the finance committee with the plan. But I definitely, and yeah, absolutely, if we can generate new tax-based growth through investment industrial parks, that's just good for overall revenues for the city of St. John and our financial capacity.
So are you thinking that we would probably end up borrowing for the industrial park expansions? I see the city manager, you're shaking your head no. Yeah, okay.
It's too early. We need to see the business case, and then we'll come back with a full strategy.
Sure.
If I may, we really have no idea what the investment will need to be in the industrial parks until we complete the strategy. So once we do that, then we have to figure out, much like we've done with the comprehensive recreational facility, how are we going to fund that that strategy? And the term I use is a vision without resourcing is nothing but a hallucination. There, CFO.
Screw that one up.
Yeah. My comment is I just wanted to expose more for the public than members of Finance Committee what we're really talking about. The CFO was quite clear. And the wording is very specific, that the staff is to consider the possibility of putting up to $3 million in. We're not saying we will, and the CFO's covered that. Just rough ballpark figures, and we've thrown these out there before. For the city just to survive, status quo, if you will, we need 3% growth. That keeps the heats and lights on and acceptable service delivery. If we want to thrive as a city and excel in terms of service delivery and give the community more of what they want, we really are aiming at 4 to 5% annual growth in order to achieve that. Again, very rough ballpark figures. For us to save, as we're suggesting now within this report, we're really talking about growth rates in the 6% and more. That's where you start to get the flexibility to consider this. That's why the secondary part of the recommendation, I think, is so important. We can and normally do have some form of a modest surplus at the end of a year. And instead of just using that as, excuse the expression, free money a year after that, putting it into this, I think, is a very prudent step, because there's no guarantee that we will have a tax assessment growth rate to be able to do what we would like to do in terms of putting significant amounts in the reserve right at the beginning of the budgetary process. Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager. I think that's a very reasonable way of thinking. I appreciate it.
Councillor Hickey, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Through you to Commissioner Fudge, I think probably best. Kevin, with that $3 million number, I guess I'm hesitant because, what CPI last month was at like 152, inflation's at like 7%. Is it reasonable to expect in 5 years that building is going to cost us $60 million?
Good question. I mean, it's early days, right? This is really a high level estimate. As it becomes more of a real project, we'll have real estimates by real engineers. This is really looking at projects comparable and other investments and projects around Canada that we came up with this estimate. But yeah, definitely, there's a possibility it could be higher than the $50 to $60 million range that we're basing this plan on. And if it is, then we'd have to adjust and come back with a modified strategy.
Do we have any indication? Rossa has been pretty clear on their efforts to build a new arena. Do we have any indication on the cost of that project thus far? Anyone have any indications? I know it's kind of out of left field, sorry.
I do not personally. I'm not sure if Mr. Hugenholtz has any information on
that. Through you to the chair, I don't know either. They've kind of scoped and re-scoped that a number of times. And then, of course, we've seen cost inflation just over the last year or two, and I don't think they've really gone back to recost that entire project.
Okay. Thanks very much, Mike. And I guess just my last one with the fourth recommendation, and I see the city manager has his hand up because I'll come to him on it. Like, do you have a bulletproof vest or something you're going to go to regional facilities with, or what's I guess more seriously, you know, Rosse is considering an arena like this.
I don't think
What's
anybody
the
in the region,
strategy there?
I don't think anybody in the region is considering a facility like this. This would be a huge, significant increase in size compared to any facility in this region. Really, the fourth recommendation is just simply to ask them if there's any interest. If there's interest in the project or not. Really, not to advocate for any funding, just to see where they're at with their own investments and whether they'd be interested in this project at all, and then starting from there as a starting point. Over to
I think that's fair. I think that's fair.
City Manager.
Yeah, two quick thoughts. First of all, I really do suggest to all members of council that we get out of our head that this is nothing but a whole bunch of arenas smashed together in a building. It's far from that, actually. I certainly see a scenario, and I'm not trying to pre-stage anything, where maybe it's only 2 arenas, but the other comprehensive recreational aspects are there as well. And maybe we can hang on to a couple of other arenas to supplement that if necessary. So it is very early days, but we should get out of our heads that this is just a consolidation of arenas, because it is not by any stretch, certainly the way council has depicted it within their catalytic project. On the issue of it becoming a regional facility, I think the possibility is certainly there. First of all, the provincial government has made it quite clear that they are no longer funding recreational facilities unless they are regional. That's more or less their approach. So if we're going to get money from the province, then the region needs to come to a consensus on this. And quite frankly, the white paper is quite clear about and the subsequent information is quite clear about what constitutes a regional facility moving forward. And what we're describing here would absolutely fit the mold of what is envisioned as a regional facility moving forward. And if we can get agreement that it's a regional facility, then cost sharing starts to play. So I don't think it's a pie in the sky recommendation. There's obviously a lot of work to be done, a lot of discussion, but there's certainly a possibility there. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much for the insight to everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Thanks, Mr. City Manager. Kind of wonder if one of our revenue opportunities is to write the municipality version of Wealthy Barber. CFO Fudge, take note of Councillor Radwin's addition to our common sense stuff that, you know, the recreation facility won't pay for the industrial parks, but the industrial parks will pay for the recreational facility. I think it's wise, and I'm glad Councillor Radwin brought that up. And equally glad that, you were prepared with, yes, and we've got to fund that too. We just need to find the price tag and then have a plan for it, which is bang on. This report, again, along with the suite of everything else that finance has brought over the last 5 or 6 years, made me smile. It just makes so much sense. It is a priority of the Council of the City of St. John for a comprehensive recreational facility. And thank to the City Manager for reminding us it's a whole lot more than rinks. We've talked about, we don't know what it is yet, but how do we get arts and other recreation into whatever this is? Because we have lots of hockey players, speed skaters, figure skaters in the city, but we also have lots of musicians and actors and people who do yoga and all sorts of things. So we don't know what it looks like yet. But we know we want it. We know they're expensive. And what would you do in your household if you said, I'm targeting this to be an expense for our household in the future? You say, I'm going to start saving for that. And just, well, it's a bit of an homage to the fact that we're financially stable enough that we can now talk about saving for the future. We're not scratching to see how we make this year. So it is a great indication of where we are at financially right now that we can plan for these things. Plus, it's that look forward. It's just prudent. Whatever this facility ends up being, we're going to have to pay for it. And so we should plan for that being a catalytic project. I think the recommendations make sense. I really appreciate the committee. This we're on top of things. What about other projects that are also catalytic? Councillor Hickey, concerned about price and where we are now and making sure that we're moving forward. And Councillor Norton, your recreation. And then we got the recreation project and you just sat there and smiled. So, you know, this team is really on top of things with this. I think it's financially prudent. Yeah, this one, a lot of good stuff here, but this one just made me smile with the wisdom that's in it. So if there are no further questions, I will take a motion on the recommendation. Councillor Hickey, Councillor Norton, all in favor signify by saying aye or waving. Yep, contrary minded. And carried. Is there anything else for us, CFO Fudge?
That concludes the program. Thank you.
So just a quick, really good news recap before we sign off. You know, I don't know if this is how you put the agenda together. Some wise but tough stuff we had to do early with the bilateral program projections. We needed to make some adjustments because of where we are with inflation and supply chain. But we handled it, or we are handling it. Opportunity to increase the number of trees we are planting in the city of St. John. That's coming with our draft strategic plan and an opportunity. A 2-year capital budget. We just talked about adjustments, but this is a move ahead and moving forward to a long-term capital budget, which is sound financial management. We're moving this to council. We picked up on the council professional development policy, and thanks to staff, we heard that in council 3.5 weeks ago, and we've turned it around, and within 4 weeks we'll have a policy addressing it back to council. Updating our grant policy with best practices, and ultimately starting to plan for whatever our comprehensive arts and recreational facility will be. So I really appreciate the team, and I say it all the time, but it's true. Our finance team is fantastic. I really appreciate our committee, but finance as a value in the organization. We had partners here from St. John Water, engineering, recreation, infrastructure, all feeding into this good stuff that we're moving forward. So thank you to everybody. Good job, team. And we'll get to share the good news with council bits and pieces, I'm sure, next week. So I'll take a motion to adjourn. Councillor Hickey, Councillor Norton, Councillor Radwin, thanks very much. On the motion, all in favor? We are adjourned. Have a great night, everyone.
Good night.